Have you considered your grief as an open door?
What if I told you that there's more to it? That there are benefits and resources from heaven that are available to help you in this life, and you've never heard about them? Are you curious? Well, join Gordon Merrill as he digs deeper into making heaven real in this life.
Welcome back to Making Heaven Real. About the time Halloween approaches every year, there seems to be a lot of discussion on the internet about the veil getting thinner between us and the other side. Well, metaphysically, there are any number of things referred to as triggers that can help thin that veil. Some are thought to occur naturally between Mother Earth and using specific energetic shifts in nature like late October, early May. Others deal with more of a personal spiritual readiness and clarity. Grief is widely believed to thin the veil, creating a heightened sacred space where the boundary between physical and spiritual becomes somewhat permeable. This thinning is particularly noticed during times of intense loss. That last statement actually came from a church. Remember back in episode 2549 when we discussed the physiological effects on the body from intense grief following a devastating loss. One medium actually told me that she thinks that chemical process just helps us to be still for a while, which allows the spirit to orient and collect their spirit cognizance on the other side. Kind of makes sense. If we're into it too much with them at the beginning, it kind of hurts their processing and getting oriented and getting settled. Think of it like a new job. Your skills, your profession, your career, those things don't change. But when you start in a new location with a new office and a new email system and a new boss and different ways of texting internally and internal messaging and all that, there's a lot of orientation that comes about in that new location. So too for a spirit. Yes, spirits have been around since the beginning of time, since, the beginning of God and heaven. But this particular spirit who is left now has a new task in order to learn how to communicate with some spirit or spirits that are still left on their human experience on Earth. Even if spirits, for ease of description for this illustration, even if you have spirits A and B and they've known each other for a long time, for, many thousands of years, obviously. But in this particular situation, Spirit 8, let's call them, the old book series for, elementary students years ago with Dick and Jane. So let's say Spirit A is Dick and Spirit B is Jane, and Dick suddenly passes away and goes back to heaven as Spirit A. But Jane's still here. Even if A and B knew each other in multiple lifetimes before, this situation is different. Because now for the first time, one of these spirits has to figure out how to communicate with and talk to Spirit B, who is actually Jane, on this human experience. It doesn't mean that it's hard to do. It doesn't mean that it's against their abilities. It just means a new situation. Like you finding yourself in a new office for the first time. When we discuss the physiological effects and how that works against you on the body, and how that may just be nothing more than a time to let you be still for a while the spirit is catching on. Part of that also is so that we're not in a big hurry to keep pushing them for some kind of communication, which kind of hurts their process to getting acclimated. And I can tell you about that here in a little bit. I think what we're looking at here is the physiological part of this is somewhat of a natural way to not exactly lock the door, but make it harder to open for a little bit. Then little by little, we find ways to open that door. I've been alluding to and kind of hinting at a term over several episodes recently called the grief gate. Don't even try looking it up for Google, because when you do, you're going to find something that's completely different than what heaven calls the grief gate. Grief does not block spirit. Grief changes the doorway. Now, part of this you've already heard, but I think the way I'm presenting it this time gives a little bit more clarity to what I'm talking about. When my wife passed a little over 2 years ago, nobody knew why. From the medical standpoint, the hospital, the doctor, everyone that was in the room during the procedure, nobody had any understanding as to why she passed. The hospital still has it listed on her medical record as death by unknown origin. I even went and took on the extra expense of having a private autopsy done to try and find out what was going on, because the medical training in me as a former paramedic just could not let it rest. And the autopsy could not find a reason either. What transpired after that is several weeks of this human experience for this spirit in some very intense emotions, some intense concerns, and probably some thoughts and processes that may have been a little dark as well. I attempted to try and contact her through our medium friend 2 weeks after she passed. The first thing out of the mouth of the medium was, normally this is 60 to 90 days before we can contact these people, because they're over there building their strength. There's the orientation we were talking about. But she said, well, let me try and connect, and I'll call you back either way and let you know. 30 seconds later, the phone rings, and it's her. And she is amazed at the power with which she's coming through. Specifically because there was an urgent need to communicate 2 or 3 things on my behalf. Found out later that wasn't all within her ability. She was too new to the office. May not have had the direct inter-office messaging application ready to go on her behalf. But as urgent as it was, and as needed as that information was, she pulled heavenly equity and pulled power from other resources to help her communicate at that time. Now, that communication obviously was through a medium. It wasn't directly to me, because neither she was ready nor I. I was still in that physiological state. I was having some concerns and lots of questions, probably mostly because of that physiological state. But I wasn't ready. I hadn't found the new doorway that grief opened up. And she wasn't ready either, because she wasn't acclimated to the new office yet. But because of the urgent need, heaven came together and made that communication happen. So when we're talking about how the physiological kind of puts us on hold for a little while, we've talked about how in our grief toolkit, not to overwhelm somebody who's grieving, not to talk to them a lot about what they should do or shouldn't do or any of that, because quite honestly, for the first couple of days, they won't remember any of it. And that's where, like I said, the medium said, the chemical process just helps us to be still for a while. Gives us a chance to work on our responses. Get over the numbness that we have after that devastating loss. And get to the point where we're actually understanding communication again and processing cognitive skills again. And by that time, more than likely, Spirit has been able to work on the communication. I think the thing that's kind of interesting about this is I read that every communication now between Spirit and the Spirit who's here still on the earthly experience has its own shape. Sounds kind of interesting, but what it turns into is, even though the message still comes through, it kind of integrates through presence, emotions, symbolism, and the message and shape kind of come together to form the communication. As grieving spirits and grieving people here on earth still in our human experience, when we get to where we can understand that, then it makes it easier for us to not try and force ourselves ahead or skip ahead and try and go all the way to the end to the final message right off the bat. This allows us to understand the communication process and work on it, be thankful for it, and allow the process to happen. It's actually kind of like learning a new language. Grief Gate changes the doorway to communication through incorporating more than just words, by integrating the communication with symbolism, emotions, and presence. Let me say that one more time. The Grief Gate changes the doorway to communication through incorporating more than just words, by integrating those words with symbolism, emotions, and presence. Compare that to how you communicate with people now. Text messages, phone, in person. For spirit communication, text messages would be basically just words that you hear. The phone communication would be when you start feeling emotions from them. And the in-person communication would be similar to feeling their presence, their feelings, and their emotions during the communication. Understanding a bit of the process that grief has on our body, how it changes the doorway through which communications with our spirits occur, and how they work to refine their abilities to communicate with us, helps us to learn the language of spirit. And that definitely makes heaven real in your life.
We hope you learned something new about God's love and His resources during our time together. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss out. You can find our social media links and our contact info in the show notes. When you're commenting, please reference the episode number. Join us next time as we again search out the ways of making heaven real in this life with Gordon Merrill.